And what part of Mexico is your family from?
They're from León, Guanajuato. They're near the city León. They're sort of in the surrounding area. So the city is, dense and a lot more wealthy. They're in sort of the area where they're, the living conditions are much, worse, which is sort of why, right, my dad wanted to come here, because where he was living, there's not many, opportunities to do anything other than just a small shop where you're, barely getting enough money to live. My dad was born into a family with he had 10 siblings, right? And once he turned 18, he decided that he didn't want to stay there. He wanted to go to America, right? Land of opportunity stuff. And he left with some of his, a couple of his siblings. I feel like it's important to mention that I don't really get much of the story, right? I since he got deported when I was 6, I don't really it's not something where it's you can go and just ask your dad, because or by living with them you can go up to them and be like, hey, why exactly did you? It's not really talked about, right? And definitely not going to ask, right, your grandma, because she doesn't really know, right? So half of his siblings who came to America stayed in Modesto, California, and then him and 2 of his brothers came to Washington, right? And sort of he was here for about 5 years, I think, 5-10 years, working construction, and then he met my mom, right? And then they had my sister, and that's sort of when my dad was I definitely have to stay here, right? He had obligations. And then they had me, and then they had my younger sister. My dad came here illegally, so he didn't really have. It was either get married to my mom or find a way to obtain citizenship in a different way, right? And he didn't want to marry my mom, so he sort of, they had a falling out, and it was either get married or you're gone, because he was found driving a car that obviously he didn't own, because he can't have a license. He can't get a license. So he gets deported when I'm about 6 years old, which is great, because that's sort of when you start, retaining memories and developing, so all the memories, right, of my experiences with him are sort of just a complete blur, right? I have a couple, right, going to the movies, construction, right? He worked on construction, being within construction, and then arguments with my mom, right? That's sort of it. The only other sort of way to tell, right, the story is just by going through, right, old family photos, which is how a lot of my drawings, right, when I'm, I use those as references, right, for a lot of my drawings, because it's sort of the only view you get into that life, those stories, living here, right, you don't really, it's all of your family is in Mexico or California, right? And then the rest is your white family, and they don't really they don't care about you that much. You're sort of just an afterthought to that whole to that entire part of your life, right? So yeah, it's like looking at history books, you know. And then besides that, right, I only have like a few. I've only retained a couple like actual stories, or not even stories, just images, right, of the actual immigration, right, the actual process. And then I know a lot of you know, people who have immigrated, with families who have immigrated, right, who've told me about how brutal the process of getting across the border is, right? You're paying someone who doesn't care whether you make it or whether you even survive, right? It's about the transaction. So he mentioned a couple times about like coming here, right? And I'm literally almost dying. Like, right, a lot of the times the coyotes, the guys who you're paying to bring you here will just screw you over, or he told me like one time they actually tried to kill him. That's the thing though, it's not a story that I know the details of. It's just, you know, I know that happened. And then another thing is the amount of times, right, he tried coming here, right, to the U.S. from Mexico, right after he was deported for the first time, right, he'd text us or call us and like, he'd be having like thoughts of like, you know, coming back. And we'd have to convince him like, no, if you come back, you'll like, there's a chance you don't even, you don't make it, or you'll be arrested, right? It's just not, it's not worth it. I have a portrait of him, right? That is, like I said, taken from an old family photo of like Christmas, and it's me. That's
You have to move your
my
fingers
dad.
a little bit. Oh my God, there you go.
I don't know. A lot of the time when looking at pictures, right, of my parents, it's like looking at a fake person. You know, this is a photo of my mom that I turned into a portrait.